Prisoner of Zion is a collection of stories, nonfiction stories that I wrote, somewhat wrapped around the theme of trying to figure out what the proper response to terrorism is or should be. Because I believed right in the beginning that if we struck back militarily, it would only make things worse. I was pretty sure of that from growing up in Salt Lake City among the Mormons and reading their history and being familiar with the history of basically persecution of Mormons and how they responded to that. And in each case, in each instance, it only made them stronger, more convinced of their faith, and in more number. So, and I thought that that would be the response if we struck back militarily with, you know, the Muslims in that part of the world. And it, you know, I think at this point, I don't think anybody would disagree that there are more terrorists now that pose a greater threat than there were on, you know, September 10th, 2001. If I had the ear of the president or members of Congress, I would say leave them alone. Leave them severely alone, which is the same advice that Captain Gunnison gave the Secretary of War when he came to Salt Lake City in 1850 and 51. A corps of topographical engineers came out and lived here in Salt Lake City for a year at that time to map the Great Salt Lake, which had never been mapped, and also to figure out what was going to happen with the Mormons, to talk to the Mormons, to try to figure out some way to deal with them other than fighting. There were a lot of people in the United States who just wanted to wipe them out, just get rid of the problem, you know, early on, because they could see that it was going to continue to grow. They were growing quite quickly, and they just wanted to get rid of them. And so it was a problem that pretty much, from what I've read, everybody in the country was talking about or had heard about, because this is on the way to the gold fields in California. You know, the 49ers. Salt Lake City is pretty much the way you go to get to the gold fields in California. So it was an important transit route. Brigham Young was busy setting up like his own kingdom in the Intermountain West. Basically what is the Basin and Range, or the Great Basin, that was going to be the Deseret, another country with its own government. They weren't intending on living in the United States. They were basically seceding. So it was, you know, the United States had some problems with that. In 1857, they sent an army across the Great Plains to force the Mormons into submission or start a war, because the Mormons didn't want really to accept federal control. And so it came down where it looked like it was going to be a war in 1857. So there were problems in the beginning. And so Lieutenant John Gunnison wrote a report, submitted to the Secretary of War when he went home to Washington, D.C. And his advice was, leave them severely alone. They're smart people. They're going to realize eventually that their prophet is just a human being. And they'll grow tired of giving all their money to him, because it was a communist society at that time. The Mormons were communists. And they'll grow tired of it. And they'll realize that democracy is a superior form of government compared to theocracy, which they were. They were a theocratic society at that time. So leave them alone, they'll figure it out on their own. But if you pressure them, if you persecute them, even if they only think that they're being persecuted, it will only make them stronger in their beliefs. And I think that holds true with the Muslims around the world who are upset with us now. I arrived in Afghanistan, I think, the 20th of November, 2001. My objective in going to Afghanistan was to write a story that would give people an idea of what it was like to live there, what it was like to be in Afghanistan, sort of a vicarious experience. Not so much news or political events, but more try to give people what's Afghanistan like, because most people here just don't know. I met some Taliban prisoners who were just riddled with shrapnel wounds all over their body. They had little, like 1-inch diameter holes where the shrapnel had gone in. Very clean burns. It burns the skin and it kind of seals up hygienically, strangely enough. But they were in really bad shape, and I asked them, why did you come here from Pakistan? And they said, because our religious leaders, our mullahs, told us to fight the great Satan of America. And I said, well, how did that go? And they said, they like looked at me like I was, a jerk. And they said, well, it didn't go very well, did it? And I said, well, would you do it again? And they both said, yes, we would do it again. And these guys may have died a few days after that. They were hanging on when I talked to them. But that kind of blew me away, that these guys had been through, they'd been down in this basement and had been bombed, burned, and flooded in a basement at Kala-e-Jhangi. And they would still do it again. If they're religious, they said, if our religious leaders told us to do it again, we would do it again. I don't think Americans will be able to go to Afghanistan safely for maybe 200 or 300 years now, because they take revenge very seriously in Afghanistan. It's part of their culture. Revenge and hospitality. Either they will invite you into their home and they will do anything to protect you and take care of you, or they will kill you into multiple generations into the future. If they don't kill you then their sons will kill you. If they're not then their sons will kill you. And that's what it's going to be like for Westerners in Afghanistan for a long time, multiple generations. So what should we do? If we can't strike back militarily or with physical force, what do we do instead? How do we respond to the terrorist threat? And I didn't know the answer for a long time. I just knew that somebody should be thinking about it and talking about it. And then I remembered this scene or story in Fantasia, the Disney film, where about the sorcerer's apprentice. Mickey Mouse is the apprentice for the sorcerer, and his job is to carry water into the castle. And the sorcerer takes a nap, goes to sleep and takes a nap, and the apprentice opens a book and casts a spell on a broom. And the broom becomes like a slave that carries water for the apprentice. And the apprentice thinks it's great, he's really happy, and then he falls asleep and has dreams of like grandeur and becoming like the king of the universe. And then he's having a dream of drowning underwater, and he wakes up and the castle is flooded with water because the broom slave hasn't stopped carrying water. It keeps going, it won't stop. So the apprentice freaks out and tries to reverse the spell. That doesn't work. And then he picks up an axe and chops the broom into little pieces. And every single one of the little pieces becomes another broom that carries water. So instead of one, now he has like 10,000 brooms carrying water into the castle. That's very similar, I think, to our situation now. And so I started to think about, like, what did he do wrong? I mean, in the story, the sorcerer wakes up, comes down and reverses the spell and everything's okay, but we don't have a sorcerer. It's not going to happen. So in the end, I realized that his mistake, the apprentice's mistake, was to act out of fear, is to respond out of fear. And I think that's our mistake. I think that when we encounter foreign cultures, or even our neighbors sometimes, just others, people who are other than us, often our way of dealing with them is by being afraid. And I think it's almost genetic. I think it's something that we have through a lot of years of evolution. But we don't have to do it that way. We don't have to be afraid of people. And, it's not like I'm not saying do nothing in response to terrorism. What I'm saying is, whatever we do, it shouldn't be a reaction of fear. For instance, we could try talking, talking to them as fellow human beings, asking them how their family's doing. Afghans always do that. The first thing they ask you is, how's your family? And they mean it. And that's a good cultural practice. How's your family doing? How are your kids? How's your wife? You know, because one thing that's for sure, that's obvious to anybody who travels to other countries around the world, is that people all over the world love their kids just as much as we do. We don't have a monopoly on that. We love our kids very much, and so does everybody in the world. And nobody wants to see their kids go hungry or get killed in a war. It's a horrible thing. And so if there is a chance to do things in another way other than to respond with violence, I think we should try that. Almost any situation where you respond with force, people are just going to resent it. I mean, either that or we kill all of them, you know? And I don't think we want to do that anymore.